The palace of Zerathia stretched high into the sky, its spires shining under the pale light of twin suns. Inside, every wall shimmered with alien crystals that pulsed softly, reflecting the rhythms of the planet itself. This was the home of Queen Zara, a ruler whose strength and intelligence had earned her the loyalty and fear of her people. Yet despite her power, there was one thing that worried her more than any enemy or natural disaster. Her daughter, Lyra. Lyra was nothing like her mother in temperament. Where Zara was stern, disciplined, and commanding, Lyra was curious, playful, and full of questions. She often wandered into areas forbidden to her, fascinated by the sounds, smells, and textures of the palace's secret chambers. She loved learning, not from tutors or guards, but from observing the world around her and asking endless questions. On this morning, Lyra had slipped out of her chambers before the palace doors could fully close. She was clad in a simple tunic that matched her mother's colors, but allowed her freedom to move quickly. Her tiny hands brushed against the walls of the corridors as she made her way toward a long-abandoned wing of the palace, one the older Zerathians whispered about with caution. Elias, a human assigned as one of the palace guards, was stationed near the outer hall. He had been brought from Earth years ago to assist the Zerathians, to serve as both a guide to human ways and a companion to the alien court. He was tall, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, but he had a gentle manner, especially around the princess. He understood that Lyra could be impulsive and difficult to control, and he had learned patience. This morning, however, he had been distracted by a report about unusual readings near the energy conduits, a matter that required his attention. It was the perfect moment for Lyra to vanish from sight. She darted into the shadowed corridor, silent as the breeze that whispered through the palace. It was not until mid-morning that her absence was noticed. A guard rushing down the main hall stumbled into Queen Zara's chamber. "Your Highness," he said, voice trembling slightly. "Lyra. She is not in her quarters." Zara's eyes narrowed. Her pupils contracted into sharp slits, a sign of both anger and fear. "What do you mean she is not there?" "She cannot have left the palace," she said, her voice controlled but edged with panic. "She is missing," the guard said. "All searches have failed so far." A hush fell over the room. The Queen's attendants and advisors exchanged anxious glances. In the history of Zerathia, no princess had ever disappeared without warning. Zara turned sharply, her flowing robes swirling. "Gather the guards," she commanded. "Every corridor, every chamber, every hidden passage. Find her, now." Among the guards was Elias. His mind raced, piecing together what little he knew. Lyra was intelligent but reckless. She would not have left quietly. Something must have drawn her into hiding. He did not panic, but a sharp tension gripped him. Human lives were often seen as fragile on Zerathia, but he had learned that a human mind could solve problems in ways aliens sometimes overlooked. He began his search carefully, moving through the palace corridors with quiet precision. Unlike many of the Zerathian guards who relied on brute strength and powerful detection tools, Elias relied on observation and deduction. He noted the faint scuff of small feet near the eastern wing, the smudge of dirt along a crystal wall, the barely audible hum of energy shifted by someone passing too close to the conduits. Lyra, meanwhile, had curled herself into a small alcove deep within the abandoned wing. She peered out from behind a stack of old storage crates, eyes wide with excitement and curiosity. The walls around her were covered with old murals depicting the early days of Zerathia, when creatures of all forms had lived in harmony. She reached out and touched a carved figure, imagining the stories behind it. She whispered to herself. "I wonder why humans see the world differently from us. Maybe Elias could explain it." Elias's steps echoed lightly as he approached. Lyra froze for a moment, then relaxed slightly, recognizing the familiar sound of his boots. She had always admired the human guard. He was patient and kind, and unlike many Zerathians, he never treated her as fragile or inferior. Elias stopped just short of the alcove. "Lyra," he said softly, "I know you're there." "You don't have to hide." Lyra peeked out, her eyes shining. "I just wanted to see it for myself," she admitted. "I wanted to know what's beyond the palace walls." Elias nodded, understanding her curiosity. "I can't let you wander alone," he said, "but I can show you safely. There are places here that are dangerous even for someone like you." Lyra considered this. She had always loved adventure, but she also trusted Elias. Slowly, she climbed out from her hiding spot. Elias extended a hand, not as a guard restraining a princess, but as a companion ready to guide her. Together they moved deeper into the wing. The corridors twisted like a labyrinth, filled with the faint hum of energy that powered the palace. Old lights flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The abandoned wing was full of forgotten objects, broken machines, containers of alien artifacts, and old holographic projectors that flickered on for a moment when brushed by Lyra's hand. She laughed softly at each new discovery, while Elias watched carefully, guiding her away from unstable sections. Even here he noted the dangers: crumbling floors, exposed conduits, and rooms that could trap an unthinking visitor. Hours passed, though time in Zerathia moved differently depending on the energy cycles. Finally, they reached a small chamber where sunlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling. Lyra sat down, exhausted but exhilarated. Elias leaned against the wall, eyes scanning the corridors to ensure no one had followed them. "You could have gotten hurt," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Curiosity is good, but you must respect the limits of your environment. Even a princess cannot escape the laws of the world." Lyra tilted her head. "But you humans always find ways to adapt," she said. "You think differently. That's why you survived on your planet for so long. Maybe that's why you were brought here." Elias smiled faintly. "Perhaps," he said. "But I also learn from you. You see the world with a fresh mind. That's something humans sometimes forget." They shared a quiet moment, the silence filled only by the soft hum of the palace and distant calls of alien wildlife outside. For Lyra, it was a moment of understanding. Humans were more than fragile creatures. They had minds capable of creativity, patience, and insight. For Elias, it was a moment of connection, seeing the potential in the young princess and understanding the delicate balance of trust he had earned. But even as they rested, the palace buzzed with concern. Queen Zara had mobilized every guard and surveillance device, her fear growing with each passing hour. While the queen's anger simmered at Lyra's recklessness, she could not ignore the quiet competence of Elias. Humans were underestimated by many Zerathians, yet here he was leading her daughter through the unknown safely. Lyra, finally noticing Elias's vigilance, smiled. "Do you think they'll be angry?" she asked quietly. "Perhaps," Elias admitted, "but sometimes the right choices aren't the easiest, and sometimes understanding is stronger than fear." Lyra nodded, a thoughtful expression on her face. She realized that exploration was not just about adventure, but also about learning, and learning required guidance, patience, and trust. By the time the twin suns began to set, casting long shadows across the palace corridors, Elias and Lyra had found their way back to the outer wings. Far enough that the immediate panic of the guards had not yet reached them. They paused to look at the horizon, the wild lands stretching endlessly beyond the palace walls. "This is only the beginning," Lyra whispered. Elias nodded. "And we'll face it together," he replied. As night fell, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Inside, Queen Zara prepared to confront the disappearance of her daughter, unaware that Lyra's brief adventure had revealed something more profound. The quiet strength, intelligence, and trustworthiness of the humans she had long underestimated. And somewhere in the shadows, Lyra and Elias settled in for the night, not as princess and guard, but as companions united by curiosity, courage, and a bond that neither palace walls nor alien customs could break. The next morning, the palace was alive with whispers and hurried footsteps. Every corridor seemed to echo with concern over the princess's disappearance. Queen Zara moved through the halls with her usual precision, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her worry. She summoned Elias immediately. Elias entered the grand chamber, bowing slightly. "Your Highness," he said calmly, "Lyra is safe. I found her." The queen's eyes narrowed. "Safe?" she repeated, her voice sharp. "Do you have any idea the panic you caused? The entire palace has been searching for hours. How could a princess disappear and you just find her?" "I followed her trail," Elias explained. "She was curious and wanted to explore. She did not resist me. I merely guided her safely back." Zara's anger flared for a moment, but she took a deep breath. She was a ruler of vast intelligence. She could not afford to let her emotions cloud her judgment. "Very well," she said, voice controlled. "Tell me exactly where she was." Elias described the abandoned wing, the old chambers, the corridors lined with forgotten murals. "She was observing the history of Zerathia," he said. "She wanted to understand, to learn. It was not reckless in the way you imagine. She was careful. The Queen's eyes softened just slightly. She still did not approve, but she understood. Lyra had always been different, curious in ways that many Zerathians found foolish. Elias had not only kept her safe, but had also respected her mind and spirit. Very well, Zara said. But you will remain with her at all times. Do you understand? Yes, Your Highness, Elias replied, bowing again. Later that day, Lyra sat in her chambers, still wide-eyed from her adventure. She had touched the murals, examined the old machinery, and even tried to decipher some of the writings etched into the walls. She could hardly contain her excitement. Elias sat nearby, reviewing his notes about the palace's architecture and energy flows. Though the humans were physically weaker than the Zerathians, their minds were capable of extraordinary observation and deduction. Elias had noticed patterns in the palace corridors that even veteran Zerathian guards had overlooked. You know, Lyra said suddenly, I think humans see things differently. You notice details, like the scuff on the floor or the hum of the conduits that no one else would. Elias looked up, faintly smiling. Perhaps. But you also notice things differently, Lyra. You see the story behind the walls, the life behind the stones. That is something humans often miss. Lyra thought about this. She had always felt a little out of place among the Zerathians, with their rigid rules and structured thinking. Humans seemed different, unpredictable in a way that was sometimes frustrating but also fascinating. The afternoon passed with lessons disguised as conversation. Lyra asked about the Earth, about human inventions, and about how humans survived in harsh environments. Elias answered patiently, showing her diagrams of human structures, maps of deserts and oceans, and stories of ingenuity and courage. Lyra listened intently, fascinated by the cleverness and creativity of a species so physically fragile yet so mentally strong. By evening, the palace was quiet again. Most of the guards had returned to their posts, though a few remained on high alert, fearing further surprises. Lyra looked out over the palace gardens, bathed in the soft glow of the twin moons. Do you think the palace is ready to see humans as equals someday? She asked Elias. Elias considered this. Perhaps someday. But it takes time. Humans have qualities that many Zerathians undervalue. We are adaptable, patient, and capable of thinking in ways they cannot imagine. That is our strength, Lyra smiled. I like that. Maybe one day I'll show them. The next morning, Elias received a report of strange activity near the palace's perimeter. Sensors had detected movement, but not the kind caused by ordinary wildlife. Curious, he decided to investigate, knowing that understanding the unusual was part of keeping Lyra safe. He found footprints, small and precise, not unlike those of Lyra's, but arranged in patterns that suggested careful planning. There was no indication of threat, but the arrangement intrigued him. He followed the tracks carefully, noting how they led toward hidden passages used centuries ago for maintenance and secret observation. Lyra, insisting on accompanying him, learned how to move quietly and observe without disturbing the environment. Elias guided her with patience, showing her how to notice subtle details, a faint shift in the energy hum, a barely perceptible indentation in the ground, or a light that flickered differently when touched. You see, Lyra, Elias said, crouching beside a small device. Humans have survived for so long because we pay attention. We notice what others overlook. We adapt and find solutions without relying on strength alone. Lyra nodded, watching closely. I understand. You are clever in ways the palace guards are not. As they moved through the hidden corridors, Lyra began to understand not just the physical layout, but the logic and reasoning behind human thinking. She realized that courage was not only about facing danger, it was about noticing, understanding, and acting wisely. By midday, they discovered a small chamber filled with ancient artifacts and records from the early days of Zarathia. Many of the artifacts had human influence. Early explorers had visited the planet, leaving tools, designs, and even written observations. Lyra's eyes sparkled. This is amazing, she whispered. Humans were here long before I imagined. They learned, they adapted, and they left their mark without destroying anything. Elias nodded. Yes, that is the key. Humans survive not by dominating, but by understanding and respecting what they encounter. Lyra spent hours examining the artifacts, asking questions about their purpose and design. Elias guided her, explaining the reasoning behind human choices. the trial and error that had led to their survival, and the ingenuity required to thrive in a harsh environment. By late afternoon, they returned to the palace. Lyra was tired but exhilarated, her mind filled with new knowledge and appreciation for humans. Elias reported his findings to the Queen, carefully describing the patterns in the tracks, the artifacts, and the subtle signals that might otherwise have gone unnoticed. Zara listened with a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. Humans, she realized, had capabilities that Zerathians often ignored. While she valued strength and command, she began to see the quiet power of intelligence, patience, and observation. That evening, as the twin moons rose over the palace, Lyra curled up in a corner of her chambers with a small collection of artifacts she had brought back. Elias sat nearby reviewing the day's observations. They did not speak much, but the bond between them had deepened. Trust, curiosity, and mutual respect had created a connection that neither the palace nor the Queen could ignore. For Lyra, humans were no longer fragile outsiders. They were clever, resourceful, and capable of understanding the world in ways even the most powerful Zerathians could not. For Elias, Lyra was not just a princess to protect, but a mind to engage, a spirit to guide, and a companion with whom he could explore the unknown. Night fell, and the palace quieted. Outside, the alien winds whispered across the twin moons' light, carrying with them the secrets of the land. Lyra dreamed of exploration, of learning more about humans and the world beyond the palace walls. Elias, ever watchful, dreamed of ways to ensure her safety while encouraging her curiosity. The story of the missing princess had become more than a tale of fear or folly. It was now a story of trust, of the quiet strength of humans, and of the beginning of a bond that might one day change the way Zerathians saw their human allies. In the hidden corners of the palace, the murals and artifacts seemed almost alive, reflecting the energy of a young princess who dared to ask questions, and the human who guided her safely, showing that courage and cleverness could overcome uncertainty without violence. And somewhere deep in the palace, Lyra whispered to herself, "One day they will see. Humans are more than they seem, and maybe I will help them understand too." As the night deepened, the palace held its breath, waiting for what the next day would bring. Trust had been built, lessons had been learned, and the quiet adventure of understanding had only just begun. The morning sun rose slowly over Zerathia, spilling golden light across the palace walls and gardens. Lyra awoke with a sense of excitement she had not felt before. The adventures of the abandoned wing had opened a door in her mind, a desire to see more, to learn more, to understand the world beyond the palace walls. Elias was already awake, reviewing maps and notes from the previous day. Humans often planned, analyzed, and prepared for what they might encounter. It was part of their strength, part of what had allowed them to survive in dangerous environments far from home. "Good morning, Lyra," Elias said softly, looking up from his notes. "I thought we could explore outside today if the Queen permits." Lyra's eyes lit up. "Outside the palace, really?" she asked, barely able to contain her excitement. Elias smiled. "Yes, but only carefully. We must respect the land and its creatures, and we must be prepared for anything." The Queen had been informed of their plan. She had been hesitant at first, concerned for her daughter's safety. But she trusted Elias not only because of his intelligence, but because of the bond he had built with Lyra. She realized that humans had skills Zerathians often overlooked: patience, reasoning, and clever problem-solving. And if Lyra was to learn, she would need guidance. So with careful instructions, they left the palace gates and stepped onto the wide plains of Zerathia. The landscape stretched endlessly, dotted with strange crystalline formations and glowing flora. The twin suns reflected off the crystals, creating patterns that danced across the ground like living light. Lyra ran forward, laughing, her small feet leaving tiny prints in the soft soil. Elias followed, keeping a careful watch. He showed her how to move quietly over uneven ground, how to observe without disturbing the environment, and how to recognize patterns in the energy pulses that flowed through the planet. "You see, Lyra," Elias said, kneeling beside a patch of glowing moss, "everything has a pattern here. If you pay attention, you can understand what is safe and what is not." Lyra leaned close, touching the moss gently. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But I can also feel something, like the ground is alive." "Exactly," Elias said. "Zerathia is alive in its own way. Humans call it awareness. By observing carefully, you can understand the land without hurting it. They traveled together for hours, discovering small creatures that glided on light currents, plants that responded to touch with color changes, and streams that shimmered with natural energy. Lyra's curiosity grew with every step, and Elias guided her, explaining how humans learned from the environment, adapting to survive and thrive without needing to dominate. "You humans are clever," Lyra said at one point. "You can survive in harsh places without having the strength of a Zarathian. How do you do it?" Elias smiled. "We rely on our minds. We think, observe, plan, and adapt. Strength is useful, but intelligence and patience can solve problems strength cannot." Lyra considered this. It was a lesson she had begun to understand in the palace, but seeing it applied in the vast wilderness made it real. Humans were small, fragile even, but their minds were powerful tools, and she admired that. As they reached a ridge overlooking a valley, they noticed movement in the distance. Strange shapes shifted among the crystalline rocks, moving deliberately but carefully. Lyra's curiosity surged, but Elias held her back gently. "Wait," he said, pointing. "Observe first. Do not rush. There is more to understand if we are patient." Lyra watched, her sharp eyes noting patterns. The movement was organized, deliberate, not random. They seemed to be scouting the valley, but not in an aggressive way. Elias explained how humans often studied before acting, learning about the environment and its inhabitants before intervening. "Humans think before acting," he said. "Many creatures, even some Zarathians, act first and think later. That can be dangerous." Lyra nodded, absorbing the lesson. Patience, observation, and understanding could be as important as courage. As they moved closer, they discovered a small group of alien researchers from a neighboring sector. They were collecting samples, studying the valley's unique energy patterns. Lyra wanted to approach, but Elias reminded her to wait. "They are focused on their work," he said. "If we interrupt, we may create problems. Sometimes the right choice is to observe quietly." Lyra crouched behind a rock, watching as the researchers worked. She noticed their tools, their gestures, the way they coordinated without words. It was fascinating. Elias pointed out how humans could learn from such observation, even without direct contact. After several hours, they continued their journey deeper into the valley. Lyra's excitement never waned. She marveled at how the wind shifted across the crystalline terrain, how the plants responded to light and touch, and how every detail seemed connected. Elias showed her how to map the valley in her mind, noting landmarks and energy patterns. "This is how humans navigate unknown lands," he explained. "We pay attention to details and remember them. That way we can find our way safely and understand the environment." Lyra practiced carefully, repeating landmarks and pathways aloud. She felt a growing sense of confidence, realizing that humans were not only clever but methodical and precise. She admired that about Elias. As the day progressed, they came to a small pool of shimmering water, fed by a natural spring. The water reflected the twin suns, creating patterns of light that danced across the valley walls. Lyra leaned closer, fascinated by the reflections. "Humans study water carefully," Elias said. "They understand currents, depth, and the life it supports. Even small details can reveal important knowledge." Lyra dipped her fingers into the water, feeling its coolness and energy. She imagined humans exploring strange worlds, learning from every river, stream, and rock, adapting to survive. She realized that intelligence, patience, and careful observation were forms of strength just as real as the Queen's power. While resting near the pool, Elias noticed subtle changes in the environment. Tiny shifts in the energy patterns suggested that the valley was alive in ways beyond simple observation. Creatures hidden in the rocks moved subtly, and the wind carried faint sounds that hinted at more than natural activity. "See that, Lyra?" Elias asked. "Observation isn't just about what you see directly. It's about noticing patterns, changes, and possibilities. Humans survive by understanding these subtle signs." Lyra watched carefully, trying to interpret the signals. She realized that humans had patience, understanding, and insight in ways she had never considered. Intelligence could guide action more effectively than brute strength. And even a small human could achieve great things through observation and reasoning. As evening approached, they made camp near a small grove of energy-emitting plants. Lyra curled up on a soft patch of moss while Elias arranged their sleeping area carefully, ensuring they would remain safe and comfortable. "You were right," Lyra said quietly. Humans are strong in ways Zarathians do not always see. I think they are remarkable. Elias smiled faintly. And so are you, Lyra. You ask questions, observe, and learn. That is courage, too, in a different way. They rested under the twin moons, the valley glowing softly around them. Lyra dreamed of exploration and discovery, of learning more about humans and the world outside the palace. Elias thought about the lessons she had learned today and how trust and guidance could shape understanding across species. By morning, their journey would continue, but the first steps had already revealed much. The bond between human and princess had deepened, built on respect, patience, and shared curiosity. Lyra had learned that strength came in many forms, and Elias had seen the power of a mind willing to explore and learn. Their adventure had only just begun, but the valley had already taught them both a profound truth. Courage was not only about facing danger, but about understanding, observing, and acting wisely. And in this partnership, human ingenuity and alien curiosity were a perfect match, ready to uncover the secrets of Zarathia together. The valley seemed calm under the light of the twin suns, but Elias's senses were alert. Humans had long learned that stillness often hid subtle signals, and careful observation could reveal dangers that others overlooked. Lyra, now more attuned to the environment, followed closely, her curiosity mingled with caution. As they moved further into the valley, they noticed unusual structures partially hidden among the crystalline formations. The structures were small, geometric, and unfamiliar, suggesting an intelligent presence that was neither native to the valley nor part of the palace's known allies. "See those?" Elias whispered, pointing to the formations. "Those aren't natural. Someone or something built them." Lyra's eyes widened. "Could it be other aliens?" "Perhaps," Elias said. "But we won't know until we study carefully. Rushing in could cause problems." They approached slowly, observing from behind rocks and low plants. The structures were arranged with precision, connected by narrow pathways and small conduits. Tiny devices blinked softly as if recording or monitoring something in the area. Lyra crouched beside Elias, fascinated by the meticulous patterns. "They must be studying something," she said. "Maybe the valley itself or even the palace energy flows." Elias nodded. Humans and Zarathians alike study patterns. Observation and understanding are the first steps before taking action. That is how humans survive and adapt. They notice what others miss. They spent hours moving around the edges of the structures, learning how they were connected and what purpose they might serve. Lyra asked questions constantly, and Elias explained how humans analyze patterns, test theories, and make careful decisions based on observation rather than force. As they observed, they noticed figures moving within the structures. These figures were small and quick, arranging objects, taking measurements, and communicating silently. Their movements were deliberate but not threatening, though Elias sensed a potential problem. "They are careful," he said quietly, "but they may not realize the impact of their actions. We need to understand them before they notice us." Lyra nodded, absorbing the lesson. Courage was important, but careful thinking and observation were just as valuable. They watched the small figures adjust devices that seemed to interact with the valley's natural energy. Lyra pointed out subtle shifts in light patterns and vibrations, noticing things Elias might have missed. "You have a good eye," he said, smiling. "Humans often rely on tools, but you notice naturally." "That's valuable." By afternoon, they had mapped the outer paths of the structures, identifying entrances, energy conduits, and possible observation points. They discovered a small gap where one of the structures had been partially broken, exposing a corridor leading to the interior. Lyra was curious. "Can we see inside?" she asked. Elias considered it. "We can, but we must be careful. Humans do not rely on force. We rely on creativity and strategy. We can enter without alarming them if we plan." Together they studied the best approach. Elias showed Lyra how to move silently, how to predict movements, and how to use shadows for concealment. Lyra was a quick learner, amazed at how humans combined logic, observation, and patience to solve problems that brute strength could not. Finally, they moved through the corridor, careful to remain unnoticed. Inside, the small figures continued their work, arranging devices and monitoring energy flows. Elias whispered explanations to Lyra, showing how each action affected the environment and why understanding patterns was essential. "This is what humans do," he said. "We learn, we observe, we adapt." We do not always need to fight. Intelligence and patience often achieve more than force. Lyra nodded, fascinated. She realized that humans were clever in ways she had never considered, capable of shaping outcomes without confrontation. Courage came in many forms, and clever thinking could prevent danger entirely. As they explored, Lyra noticed a small console displaying readings similar to those of the palace's energy conduits. "Elias, they're monitoring palace energy," she whispered. "Do you think they are planning something?" Elias studied the display. "It seems they are analyzing energy patterns, not causing harm yet. But humans must always consider possibilities. We must find a way to understand their intentions and protect the palace without confrontation." They observed quietly, taking mental notes and mapping patterns. Lyra pointed out subtle shifts in the readings that suggested the group was unaware of their presence. Elias smiled. "Exactly. Observation allows humans to plan without being noticed. That is our strength." Hours passed as they continued their careful study. Lyra grew tired but remained focused, her mind alive with curiosity and learning. Elias guided her gently, showing patience and strategy, demonstrating that courage was not only in action, but also in careful thought. Eventually, they withdrew from the structures, returning to a safe distance. Lyra was excited, her mind racing with ideas. "We learned so much," she said. "We know what they are doing without them knowing. We can protect the palace quietly." "Yes," Elias said. "Humans often solve problems this way. We do not need confrontation to succeed. Observation, patience, and cleverness are powerful tools." They returned to a safe resting area in the valley. Lyra curled up, her mind filled with the day's discoveries. She realized that humans were more than she had imagined. Not only clever and resourceful, but capable of planning and protecting without relying on strength or fear. Elias sat nearby, watching over her. He knew that the knowledge they had gathered today was invaluable. Understanding the patterns, observing the small group without alerting them, and mapping the area meant that they could act wisely if needed. Humans had survived for millennia not because of power, but because of careful thinking and strategy. As the twin moons rose over the valley, Lyra whispered to Elias, "I think humans are amazing. You do things no Zerathian could do without fighting." Elias smiled faintly. "Humans are strong in ways that are easy to overlook. That is why trust, intelligence, and observation are so important, and you, Lyra, are learning these lessons well." They rested through the night, the valley glowing softly around them. Lyra dreamed of exploration and discovery, imagining how humans and Zerathians could learn from each other. She realized that bravery was not only facing danger, but also understanding it and acting wisely. By morning, they would return to the palace, but the knowledge they had gained would remain with them. The hidden structures and the careful observation of the small group had taught them both a valuable lesson. Intelligence, patience, and planning could prevent harm and solve problems more effectively than confrontation. As they packed to leave, Lyra glanced back at the hidden structures. "We learned so much without being noticed," she said. "I think that is very human," Elias nodded. "Exactly. Courage and intelligence, patience and observation, they work together. That is what humans are best at." They made their way back through the valley, careful and deliberate. Lyra was full of questions, eager to understand more about humans and the world around her. Elias answered patiently, explaining strategies, observations, and lessons that humans had learned over centuries. By the time they reached the palace gates, the queen was waiting, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity. Elias reported on the day's findings, carefully describing the hidden structures, the small figures, and the patterns they had observed. Zara listened intently, her mind beginning to appreciate the subtle power humans could bring. They did not fight, they did not dominate, yet they achieved understanding and protection. Humans, she realized, had strengths Zerathians often overlooked. Lyra, exhausted but exhilarated, curled up beside Elias in a quiet corner of the palace gardens. "Humans are amazing," she whispered. "I think they can teach Zerathians a lot." Elias smiled, understanding her meaning. Trust and patience had built a bond between them, and the lessons learned today would shape the way they approached the world in the days to come. Humans were clever, adaptable, and capable of extraordinary problem-solving. Courage and wisdom, he realized, were not always loud or visible. They were quiet, careful, and powerful. As the night fell and the palace quieted, The twin moons reflected off the crystalline walls, casting long, soft shadows. Lyra slept peacefully, confident in the lessons learned and the bond with Elias. He remained vigilant, watching over her, ready to guide and protect without force, demonstrating that humans could achieve great things through intelligence, strategy, and understanding. The day had revealed a subtle truth. Bravery was not only in action, but in thought. Humans could protect, solve, and adapt in ways Zerathians might never have imagined. And with Lyra learning from Elias, the future held promise for cooperation, understanding, and the quiet power of human ingenuity. The palace slept, the valley rested, and a new chapter of discovery was only beginning. The sun rose slowly over the palace, casting gentle light across the crystalline walls and gardens. Lyra awoke with a sense of anticipation and excitement. The lessons she had learned over the past days, the adventures she had shared with Elias, and the quiet wisdom of observing without rushing, all of it had changed her perspective. Today, she felt ready to return fully to the palace and share what she had discovered. Elias was already awake, checking the maps and notes they had gathered in the valley. His careful mind traced patterns, prepared for any surprises, and ensured that Lyra's return to the palace would be both safe and smooth. Humans were often underestimated, but their strength lay in intelligence, patience, and planning. Today, Elias knew, all those qualities would be needed. Lyra dressed quickly, her tunic brushing lightly against her skin, and followed Elias through the corridors leading out of the gardens. She moved with newfound confidence, aware of the patterns in the palace architecture, aware of the way light and shadow could guide her steps.
Elias smiled faintly, seeing how much she had grown. "Do you feel ready?"
he asked softly. Lyra nodded. "I do. I've learned so much from you, Elias. Humans are amazing. I want the palace to see that too." They walked through the palace gates and into the outer corridors, careful to avoid drawing attention. Lyra pointed out subtle signs she had noticed on their previous journey: small energy fluctuations, faint markings on the walls, and patterns in the way the guards moved. Elias nodded in approval. Humans relied on observation and understanding. It was clear that Lyra had absorbed these lessons quickly. As they approached the central chamber, the queen waited. Her expression was unreadable, a mixture of concern, curiosity, and perhaps admiration. She looked at Elias and then at her daughter, noting the change in Lyra's posture, her confidence, and the attentive gaze she held toward the human guard. "Lyra," Zara said, her voice calm but firm, "I see that you have returned safely." "Yes." "Mother?" Lyra replied, her tone respectful but bright. "And I have learned much. Elias has taught me to observe, to understand, and to act wisely." The queen studied them both carefully. Elias's presence had always been a subject of quiet debate among the Zerathians. Humans were considered fragile, clever perhaps, but weak in comparison to the alien strength of their species. Yet here was evidence to the contrary. A human had guided the princess through the wilderness, ensured her safety, and revealed insights she could not have gained alone. "You have returned with wisdom," Zara said slowly. "It seems there is more to humans than I have understood." Lyra nodded. "Yes, Mother. They are patient, observant, and capable of great understanding. Courage is not only in strength, but in thought and care. Elias showed me this." The queen's expression softened. "Then you have learned the value of partnership, trust, and intelligence." Lyra smiled. "I have. And I think the palace could learn from humans as well. They are capable of solving problems without conflict, seeing what others might miss, and protecting life in ways we might not always recognize." Zara considered this. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, reflected both pride and understanding. She realized that the palace's perception of humans needed to change. They were not mere assistants or fragile beings. They were intelligent, resourceful, and capable of insights that Zerathians often overlooked. "You have proven yourself," she said, turning to Elias. "You have not only protected my daughter, but you have demonstrated the quiet power of human ingenuity. For that you have my respect." Elias inclined his head, accepting the praise with humility. "Thank you, Your Highness. I only did what humans do best: observe, plan, and act wisely." Lyra moved closer to Elias, resting a hand lightly on his arm. "I trust him," she said simply. "He has taught me much, and I know he will continue to guide me safely." The queen nodded, a small smile forming. "Then it seems lessons have been learned on both sides. Perhaps it is time for Zerathians to see humans not as weaker beings but as valuable allies. The day passed in quiet reflection. Lyra explored the palace halls with Elias, observing details she had never noticed before. The flow of energy through the walls, the delicate interactions of the palace's systems, and the subtle patterns in the movement of both creatures and guards. Elias guided her carefully, demonstrating how humans applied logic, observation, and foresight to solve problems. Lyra's excitement grew with every discovery. She realized that courage and strength were not always loud or visible. Intelligence, patience, and careful observation could achieve remarkable results without confrontation. Humans had survived and thrived for centuries because of these qualities, and now she could see their value firsthand. In the late afternoon, they returned to the gardens. Lyra curled up on a soft patch of moss, resting beside Elias as he reviewed the day's observations. She felt safe, confident, and inspired. Humans, she realized, were not just clever. They were capable of fostering understanding and solving challenges in ways that complemented Zerathian strength. Elias watched over her quietly, reflecting on the journey they had shared. Trust had been built, knowledge had been gained, and the bond between human and princess had grown stronger. He understood that courage could take many forms. It could be physical, yes, but it could also be intellectual, strategic, and compassionate. As the twin moons rose over the palace, Lyra whispered softly, "I think I understand now. Humans are amazing in ways we should never overlook, and I will help others see that too." Elias smiled. "And you, Lyra, are learning to see the world with both curiosity and wisdom. That is a rare gift." The palace was quiet, but within its walls a subtle change had begun. The lessons of observation, patience, and understanding were spreading, carried by the bond between Lyra and Elias. Humans were no longer merely assistants or fragile beings. They were teachers, guides, and companions capable of profound insight. Over the next few days, the Queen observed Lyra and Elias carefully. She noticed how Lyra applied the lessons she had learned: patience in observation, careful reasoning before action, and a willingness to see value in beings different from herself. She saw how Elias guided the princess not with force, but with knowledge and understanding, demonstrating that humans had a quiet strength Zerathians could learn from. Finally, the Queen called a meeting of the palace council. Lyra stood beside Elias, her posture confident. The Queen addressed the assembly. "We have learned that strength is not always measured in force. Humans possess intelligence, patience, and the ability to observe and adapt in ways we sometimes overlook. We must value these qualities, for they complement our own." The council members murmured among themselves, some skeptical, others curious. Lyra stepped forward. "I have seen it for myself," she said. "Elias has shown me how humans think, observe, and solve problems. They are clever, patient, and brave in their own way. I believe we can learn much from them." The Queen nodded in approval. "Then let this be a lesson for all. Humans are not weak or insignificant. They are capable of great understanding, and we must recognize their value." The assembly fell silent, but a sense of respect and realization settled over the room. Humans, once underestimated, were now seen in a new light. Lyra had not only grown in confidence and understanding, but she had also become a bridge between Zerathians and humans, showing that cooperation and respect could lead to knowledge and safety without conflict. As the sun set, Lyra and Elias walked together through the palace gardens. The twin moons rose above, casting soft silver light across the crystalline structures. Lyra rested her head lightly against Elias's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Elias smiled faintly. "You don't need to thank me. Humans learn by helping and observing, but I am glad to see how much you have grown." They continued through the gardens in silence, a quiet understanding between them. Lyra knew that humans were remarkable, not because of their strength, but because of their intelligence, patience, and insight. Elias knew that Lyra was ready to lead, to explore, and to teach others about the value of observation and understanding. By nightfall, the palace rested peacefully. The adventures of the past days had changed more than just Lyra. They had shown the palace the quiet power of human ingenuity, the strength in patience, and the value of careful thought. Trust had been built, knowledge had been shared, and a bond between species had grown that promised understanding and cooperation for years to come. Lyra curled up beside Elias in a quiet corner of the gardens, feeling safe and inspired. She dreamed of the adventures still to come, of learning more from humans and of showing the palace that courage came in many forms. Elias watched over her, knowing that the lessons they had learned together were only the beginning. The twin moons cast a gentle glow across the palace, reflecting off the crystalline walls and illuminating the bond between princess and human guard. It was a bond built on trust, respect, and shared discovery. A reminder that true strength came in many forms and that intelligence, patience, and courage could achieve what force alone never could. And as the night deepened, Lyra whispered softly, "I think I understand now. Humans are amazing, and together we can do so much." Elias nodded quietly. "Yes, Lyra. Together we can do so much." The palace slept. The gardens were still, and the bond between human and princess stood as a